Hello, everybody. Welcome to Collect Investments. Let's continue our last week's topic and try to find the best way to borrow money. We need to pick what is the best term to borrow money, whether you use 1 month, 3 months, 2 years, and so on. So last week, I recommended that we can choose between 6 months and 2 years, and very often pick the 2 years if its interest rate is more than 20% higher than the 6 months. But that's just based on I look at a few numbers and speculated strategy. This time, let's get more scientific. I'll try to use a backtest to find the best borrowing strategy. Okay, so first I downloaded the history of Treasury interest rate in the last 35 years. But if we care about the 1 month bill, it's only the last 25 years. And I looked at these terms, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and 2 year. These are the terms of the US Treasury. And I try to use bonds that expire in the same number of months. I assume when we use bonds to borrow money, we can borrow at a slightly higher interest rate, more specifically 0.3% higher than the Treasury rate. And the backtest tested several strategies. First, of course, you just pick one term. For example, you always borrow 6 months, or you always borrow 1 year, and so on. And another strategy is to pick between two terms. For example, you could pick high, whichever term has a higher interest rate, you pick. Or you pick low, which is opposite. Or you pick with a threshold. So basically, if the long term is higher than the short term by a threshold, then you pick the long term. Otherwise, you pick the short term expiration date. So as an example, if the threshold is 0.2, that means if the long term yield or interest rate divided by the short term yield is more than 1.2, which means the long term yield is more than 20% higher than the short term yield, you pick the long term. Okay, and with backtest, I try to test all combinations. So remember last week, we talked about how to choose between 6 months and 2 years. So for this, the backtest results by picking 6 months and 2 years has all these combinations. And you can see that I ranked them from the best strategy with the lowest interest rate to borrow money, and the one ranked the lowest has the highest interest rate. So the best strategy, rank number one, is you use a threshold of 1.0. That means if the 2 year rate is more than double of the 6 months rate, you borrow the 2 years. And in this case, about 91% of the time you use 6 months. And there's a 9.3% of the time you use 2 years. The slightly better strategy is a fixed 6 months, which means you always pick the 6 months. And the strategy I picked last time, which is using a threshold of 0.2% to pick between 6 months and 2 years, actually doesn't perform very well. It's below average. It's ranked number 7. So again, a hunch is not very scientific. But this only considered 6 months and 2 years. What about we also consider the 1 month, 3 months, and 1 year? So in that case, I can only pick 25 years instead of 35 years of historical data. And there are about 80 strategies. The strategy I recommended last week is actually very bad. And in this slide, I showed you the top 10 best strategies. You can see most of them are borrowing very short term. You borrow 1 month or 3 months or choose between 1 month and 3 months and so on. So I marked the rank 3 as red because this strategy is very different from all others. It peaks between 3 months and 2 years with a threshold of 1.0. And there's a 22% of the chance you pick the 2 years. So why I mark it as red? Because I suspect this is a overfit, which means we are just lucky because there's no other 3 month, 2 year strategy among the top 10s. But if you look at the 1 month, 3 month strategy, they're everywhere. It's not very sensitive to the threshold. This is a good sign. That means inherently, if you borrow short term in the last 24 years, you get a much lower interest rate overall. So this is more robust. And if you pick an overfit value, such as 3 months, 2 years with threshold 1.0, it may not work well in the future. So we'll discuss more about how to interpret the backtest results and how to make it more robust in next week's talk. Okay, and for this week, we only need to know that picking a short term, 1 month or 3 months, would give us overall the lowest interest. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you.